I think that sense that a lot of men have is that there isn't really a script anymore to follow to manhood, right? To mature masculinity. And I think that's, in one way, that's for a good reason. But the way I think about this is, if you think about like the script that my dad had, right, about being a breadwinner.
Yeah, so I was going to say, let's look at some previous scripts so we can examine those, right?
So like my parents are a good example. Born in the 40s, had the kids in the 1960s, and them it was like, my mum knew that she was mostly going to be the homemaker and the mum. She worked as well. She was a nurse. But my dad knew that he was going to be the breadwinner, right? The provider. There was not a discussion about that. There was no question about that. So they had pretty clear roles. Now, the problem with that, of course, was that the roles depended on the woman, in this case, my mum, being economically dependent on my dad.
Right.
That's the problem. And that's what the problem that the women's movement successfully, to a large extent, set out to solve, right? But my dad was also quite emotionally dependent on my mom, right? And vice versa. But I do think there was it's a two-way street that was missing from the analysis. Anyway, we tore up these old scripts, right? And we said to women, you don't have to be a housewife and mother anymore, or at least that's not your only option.
Yeah.
You can be whatever you want to be. You go, girl, right? Be president, be an astronaut, be whatever, which is amazing. Totally amazing. That message of empowerment we sent to women. So we tore up the old female script, provided a new one about empowerment and independence, and you go girl. We tore up the old male script, which is you're going to be the provider and the protector.
We don't really have a new one.
We didn't replace it. And so we're all improvising now. So basically we've gone from having some kind of script to improvisation.
Yeah.
But this is the classic thing the left does all the time. Even to this day, the left is all about tearing down systems, tearing down power structures, looking at everything through the lens of oppressor and oppressed, right? No one stopped to ask before you tear up the script if you have anything to replace that script. That seems like that would be the most basic common sense thing that anybody or any group who really had the best interest for women or for the society as a whole would say. But that's not what happened, is it? Men have always wanted the same things. So my question to Richard Reeves here, and again, I know Richard Reeves is trying to approach this from a good place. He cares about young men, so I'm not bashing him on this. But what I would ask him is, did men say they wanted their script torn up?
That's incredibly difficult to do. And so it's hard, because the good news here is what's happened to women, right? Nobody wants to roll back the economic gains of women. But I think it's incredibly irresponsible and naive of us to think that doesn't have consequences for how we think about the role of men. We've got to be able to think both of those thoughts at once. It's good that women are gaining ground. It is bad that men feel lost and purposeless, and we have got to solve that problem as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's really cool information. It's good to look at. It's good to and it makes perfect sense, right? And it's like you want to have a reason, right? And sometimes I think women, yes, they didn't have the access to money, and in a capitalistic society, money is power, right? But also, I think there was a missing respect there, right? There wasn't. I think if it had been totally respected, the sacrifices that they made and the just intrinsic value of who they are as mothers and as caretakers, and as bridges of empathy and affection, and as homemakers, no matter where they are, whether they're in a home or whether they're in a conversation, just being able to have that ability to create peace. I think if that had been more respected, then maybe they never would have felt as much of a movement, or as much of a desire to have so much of a movement,
because they had the power,
right?
Yeah,
and the power, and the money is the power.
Yeah,
the power,
and that's what that the women's movement had a huge fight about that, because there were some people in the women's movement saying, no, it's called the wages for housework movement, which was basically what we need to do is pay women to do the traditional women's role.
That's a cool idea.
And that lost out.
That was a real idea?
Yeah. And
bring that up, the wages for housework movement?
Yeah. There's a big split in the women's movement between the ones who are saying we need to value care and value care work, like wages for housework. And then there's another movement which is actually you've got to be, in the 1970s.
I never knew about this. The Wages for Housework campaign was a 1970s international movement that demanded governments recognize the value of unpaid domestic labor primarily performed by women. Wow. The founders.
And I fully support that movement, by the way. If that's something that, was started to be pushed right now in America, I would totally support that. But what I would also say to Theo is who didn't respect the work and the role that women played in the past. Now, if you want to say that men didn't, I could even agree with that to some degree. Maybe there should have been more respect from men to women who were doing those things like rearing children, being homemakers back then. Sure. But I would also argue that women didn't respect the work themselves. How do we know that? Well, let's look at right now. Women have gained immense freedom, immense capital power in the modern era. Do women now all of a sudden respect the women who stay home to be homemakers, to be wives, to rear children? No. In fact, it's less acceptable and more frowned upon now than it was even back then. And I'm talking about from other women. So, yeah, you got to ask yourself, could men have done more to set up a society that put more respect on those things? But I would argue men have always respected women who played those roles. As the old saying goes, men didn't civilize society for themselves. Men civilized society for women and children.
Sylvia Federici, Selma James, Mariosa Diacosta, and Bridget Gaultier. Their goals were to change the dependency of domestic workers, reverse power relations, and redistribute wealth.
Yeah.
Dude, that's fascinating.
That's another way we could have gone, in theory at least, right?
Right. And I'm not saying that women didn't deserve to have all the jobs and whatever they wanted to do. Right. I'm just saying if there had been a level of respect and some, and this makes perfect sense, and some financial equality, maybe they would have, they wouldn't have wanted that. I have no idea. I'm just thinking.
No, well, this is a really interesting question, because I now think we're at a point where a lot of men and women are feeling like this isn't quite working. We're trying to raise kids. We're trying to form families. We want to raise our own kids.
Right. Both parents are so stressed out that they can't even have a relationship anymore.
Right. We want to stay together and be married. We want to raise our own kids by and large, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't want to die of stress, right? So one of the ways to think about this is like you had this old family system, which was breadwinner father, homemaker mother, and it was unfair in many ways, but it was also pretty stable and very clear what everyone's role is. And it was...
That's a lie. What I mean by that is this. Was there technically some unfairness in the situation or in the family structure of the past for women? Sure. But there was also unfairness for men. No one's getting a free pass here. There's no perfection or great situation for men and that women weren't having. This is a lie. This is a lie and even by somebody Richard Reeves, who's advocating for more things for young men and for families, even he still perpetuates this lie. In the words of Thomas Sowell, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. Meaning, there were things about the old, as he says, I don't even call it what I think of as the old family model, because there is no old family model. There is just the natural family model that nature and God set forth. You don't need it to be a thought. It's not a model. It's just the way families naturally form. If a woman can give birth to the children, it has the organs to breastfeed, then by default, she would be the one who stays with the child and rear the child more. If the man is bigger, can run faster, has muscles, can carry more weight, by default, he would be the one to go fight, to fight, hunt, and do all these things. This is not some grand model that was created by society. This is if you put men and women in the wild and lead them to their natural being without any social influence. This is probably what you would still arrive at naturally. Women had the short end of the stick in some areas in relationships. Men had the short end of the stick in certain areas of relationships. So there is never a perfect situation in the old family model where men had it perfect in society or in relationships and women didn't. And this is just a farce, if we're being honest.
Pretty good for kids, right? Because of that stability when it worked, right? We've replaced that with a different model now where we don't want that economic inequality. So both men and women are going to work. That can create all kinds of stress. And maybe that relationship is hard to sustain, which means it might end up separating, which is not good for kids.
Right, and the rules aren't super clear. You don't know who's going to be doing what. You don't know who's getting certain things done. You don't know.
The division of labor is not clear anymore. And a division of labor, in other words, like being clear, like you do this, I do this.
It's like an organized business, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's like everybody knows that it makes more sense. Like you're in charge of X, I'm in charge of Y. So you get really good at X, and I get really good at Y, right? You mean like
you have the breast, you should feed the baby, or you're the one who basically is more nurturing to me, that you should take care of the kids primarily when they're young. This is exactly what I just said. This isn't a model that was created. This is the natural way of things. So Richard is acknowledging there used to be a division of labor and that we all used to have our roles to play, but for whatever reason, he won't admit that we arrived at doing things that way by common sense and just the natural makeup of the human male and female bodies.
The interesting path we took instead was like, okay, women need to get into the labor market and have labor market power. I think that was almost certainly that's the right. I don't imagine a world where the wages for housework movement, like huge government subsidies to people who are staying at home, was ever likely. And there's all kinds of problems with that idea. But it's an interesting idea, but thought behind it, which is, are we doing enough to support the people who want to raise their own kids? The whole point of the women's movement wasn't to turn women into their fathers. It was to give everybody more choice.
Right.
And we haven't achieved that yet because we haven't done the rest of it, which is to change the way the workplace works, to give more support to families. I know you had J.D. Vance on, right? And J.D. Vance has supported like a child tax credit which is seen as a left-wing idea, to give more money to people who've got kids in the house.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's not wages for housework, but it's in the direction of actually valuing care through government subsidy. But that has not been an idea that's been popular for a pretty long time.
Really?
Well, since the 70s,
Right,
arguably.
yeah, you're saying that. Yeah.
He says he doesn't think there's anybody who would want to roll back the economic success of women. Anytime I've ever heard someone make a case for women entering the workforce and why it was a great thing that women came into more economic power, it was a great thing that women came into more government political power. Every time you hear people say these type of things, they never mention at the cost of what? The greatest lie is that women were liberated from men. No, that's not true. The real truth of the matter is women were liberated from the family. Taking the woman out of that situation was sold as, oh, we're taking women away from the oppressive man. No, what you did was take women out of the home and took them out of their natural God-given role. And you were shocked when there was natural consequences to that.
That's interesting. Right. So it's a similar idea. It's not the same.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be framed as wages for housework anymore,
Right.
and it certainly wouldn't be aimed just at women anymore.
Right.
It would be for families, etc. But the idea that another way to go is to actually provide financial support, like most European countries do, to parents who are at home and not just to parents who are in the workplace, that's an interesting discussion right now. And I think as long as it doesn't become a call to go back, right, we're going to help women stay in the home.
Right.
And instead, it should be to help parents figure out for themselves. And I'm a huge believer that actually fathers are doing so much more than they were in the past, right? Fathers are doing so much more in the home, so much more childcare. And dads are saying they want to do more. Interestingly, now men are more likely to say that having children is important to them than women are.
Yeah.
Men are more likely to say that getting married is important to them than women are.
Wow.
Right. And so that's a really interesting moment in history where if you've got this stereotype that it's like women who are obsessed with like getting married and having kids, like not anymore. It's now men who are saying that's a higher priority for them.
It's almost like men are coming to to bridge the gap there of like making, because there always needs to be one of the parties has to be, until we can get both of the parties to be aligned, has to be the one that wants to bring it back to let's have a family and move. Because I think you have to do it. It's like, it's how we're built.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
So I think,
how am I going to get that purpose that you were
Right.
talking about? So we've had this massive economic change. And then alongside it, we've had this huge social change, which has been the economic rise of women. Right. And so it's no longer the case that women are now like looking for a man.
Men are doing so much more nowadays than our grandparents or great-grandparents ever did, but yet we're getting so much less. That's the part that this is Richard Reeves with his half-truths, right? He sprinkles just enough of substance in there to make you go, yeah, that's true, but he leaves out the crucial parts. Why are men doing more than our fathers and grandfathers did on the domestic and home front and child rearing, but we aren't getting what we used to get in terms of respect, in terms of feminine wives? Why aren't we getting the things our great-grandparents got for doing less on the home front? Because let's be clear, men are still expected to work and do the same old social contract. He said that the contract was ripped up for men. It really wasn't. Let's be honest. Men are still expected to be men right now, as much as they were 100 years ago. And if you don't believe me, then I want you just to see what would happen if the garbage men, the people who work at the oil rigs, the refineries, the people who actually have to climb up and repair your light poles, you know, the people who actually are responsible for police officers. And I want you to really imagine what it would look like if men did say, hey, you know what, we're not getting what we want out of society anymore. We're all checking out. There's a baseline level of male participation that's still happening that we as a society take for granted. And we think we know bad. We think we know dark times, but we really don't. Because if these men truly pulled a move that the feminists pulled, like he's saying back in the 50s and the 60s, if men started really abandoning their positions like that and said we no longer want to be the ones who are the protectors, providers, and provisioners for women and children, this place would burn down so quick. The notion that women nowadays don't want to have families or get married or have children as much as men do is a clear indicator that your society is sick. But I could riff on this all day, but I want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments. I actually enjoy reading your perspective on these things a lot more than I give mine sometimes. So please let me know what you think about the video. Do you think that gender roles have been swapped and reversed? And do you think that we're at a place now where we're all improvising, like you said? I think he's right about that. I think we all are improvising at this point. But the sad part about it is we don't have to be, and that's the part no one wants to admit. But I'll leave it right there. Until next time, thank you all. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, God bless. Peace.